Welcome to Finlos Lives. This is the third part of the series dealing with the death of my mother 20 years ago. I had intended to record this a bit ago, but honestly, I have been struggling with how to close this series out. There are so many things I could tell you about who my mom was and the life that she led, but it seems a bit moot to do so. So much of who our loved ones are within our experiences are amalgams rather than specific discrete moments or memories. Do I give you more specific moments from our shared time? More big family breakfasts? More road trips? More moves from this house to that apartment? Or is it enough for me to say that my mom used food as an excuse to bring her 5 very different children together? That she grew anxious if she stayed in one place for too long? That she always had an escape plan? Either way, those aspects of who she was, and still is in my mind, are interesting, but not particularly relevant to anyone but myself and the few people who knew her, most of whom don't listen to this show. What is relevant is that I took her for granted, like so many of us do with our parents. Even if she was not always present, it was always a comfort to know she was there. I knew that if there was ever something I needed that she could provide, she would give it without hesitation. That's what parents are supposed to do. I was not prepared for when she died. I was not prepared to see how far she had deteriorated because of her illness. I was not prepared for the awesome beauty that was the moment of her death. I was not prepared for the sense of selfish relief that I experienced afterward. And I was not prepared for the intensity of the sense of loss in the days and weeks after, and the still lingering ache that persists. These episodes are intended to honor her and to acknowledge the mom-shaped space that won't ever be filled, but also to recognize how her death also led me to important realms of self-exploration, realization, and maybe, at some point, actualization. Because isn't it, or shouldn't it be, the goal of parents to leave their children with the skills and confidence to be fully independent and not bewildered or at a loss for direction? My mom did her best, but I think most people, at least people here in the US, shy away from conversations about death, dying, end-of-life care, and what happens after. And I'm talking about purely practical things like insurance, wills, estate planning, medical plans, funerary services, and all of the other very important decisions that get put off, often until it's too late to have a conversation. It's something of a cliche to hear about siblings who fight over inheritance, a spouse arguing with a parent over how to care for a terminally ill loved one, people simply having decision paralysis because things, when someone dies, can be overwhelming. And if there isn't a clear plan, then it makes making those hard choices even more difficult. So not only was I unprepared emotionally for my mother's death, I certainly wasn't prepared to help to make hard choices before, during, and after her death. The fact that I am the youngest of 5 and was 20 at the time kept me out of most decision-making processes anyways. I have so many strange experiences of those times, though. Things that I wish I knew how to handle better. I wish I knew how to talk to the undertaker, who was a cold little man who had lost the sense of compassion when talking to loved ones who had recently experienced a loss. I wish I had a better ability to financially support the rest of my family. I remember the day after my mother died, when we were talking to the undertaker and we saw how much it was going to be to have her prepared for burial, to purchase a casket, and then to fly her to Ohio where she would be buried. It was mind-blowing how much money that could cost. And I remember going to the bank and trying to take out a loan, and the woman who was helping me was incredibly kind and very patient, and explained to me how I had no assets against which to take out a loan. And so I did the only thing that I could do, which was withdraw the remainder of my financial aid, and I gave it to my family to help pay for her funeral services. After that, I couldn't pay the rent for a few months, and thank goodness for the good grace and patience of other kind people. And the landlord let us go a few months without paying the rent until we can get caught up. And you know, what really makes all of these things worse is that we live in a place where the healthcare system is profit-oriented rather than people-oriented. And care is focused on treatment rather than prevention. And when you're in the hospital and they're more concerned with turnover and clearing the bed than they are with compassion. And then there are actual helpful services like hospice, which are underfunded and not discussed, and most often not covered by regular health insurance if you're lucky enough to have insurance. But before I get too deep into the weeds, I want to speak some about how my mother's death played into and even exacerbated my own hang-ups around death and dying. I have always had a healthy fear of death. Well, to be more clear, dying itself is not what scares me. Non-existence, though, that's something that I can't wrap my mind around. But I guess that's sort of the trade-off for self-awareness, right? Evolution rewarded humans for developing the ability to be conscious and to be self-aware. And of course, with that self-awareness comes the knowledge that we are finite and we will die. I read an article that talked about how the author copes with their own anxiety around end of life by thinking about what life was like before you were born. And of course, nobody can do this. This is a mental game, right? To try to think of what things were like before you were born. And you have no memory, so you can't think about it. And that's the point, the author said. And I can't remember their name right now. But that's exactly what it'll be like when you're not alive anymore. It'll be just like it was before you were born. There's no anxiety about it. There's no concern about it because there was nothing to think about or to be concerned about. And I know I've told this story, but as I'm trying to orient myself to where some of these anxieties are anchored, it's interesting that it's a memory associated with my mother when we were on one of our road trips to or from Ohio, and we stayed in a cheap hotel that had HBO. And on the TV was the film La Bamba, and Richie Valens' plane crashes into the mountain, and Sleepwalker by Santo and Johnny is playing. And I'm not going to tell the story again because, well, I already have told the story, but I'm not going to go too deep into it. But it's just interesting that that memory is so specifically linked to the developmental moment where I was able to link the idea of death and mortality to myself, that it became real, that time is not forever for me. And I can't say exactly when it started happening, but after that, I distinctly had my first panic attack. And I continued to have them all through childhood, adolescence, and even still on occasion. When I was a kid, even into young adulthood, the most common time for these panic attacks would be when I was falling asleep. And I suppose that makes sense, and it's where we most closely mirror the process of dying, a surrender, a loss of control, a paralysis. And I fall into these cyclical patterns of thought. What is death like? What happens after I die? Back and forth and back and forth. And as I drift off, I feel my heart racing. And how does one put into words what a panic attack feels like? There are the physiological aspects of it, the heart racing, the rapid breathing. I become agitated and I feel the urge to move, to walk around. But in these moments, I usually lean into the aspect of being trapped in a lifeless shell and I don't move. And that's probably part of the problem. I wish I would have gotten up and walked around. It might have helped me to shake off the panic. And it's so funny because I remember strange rituals that we have. My father, when I was younger, we were all going to bed, he would often say, "Be sure to say your prayers." And we're not religious, not strictly so, anyways. And I remember asking, "Well, what do I say? How do I pray?" And he said, "Well, you can hope for the things that are good for you and for the people that you love," and I'm paraphrasing, "or you can say an actual prayer, like one of these things that you memorize." And I remember he taught me the typical kid prayer that "Now I lay me down to sleep." I forget how it all goes, but anyways, the second part of it is saying, "If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." It's like, man, what a dark, terrifying thing for a kid to say as they're falling asleep. It didn't help. I stopped saying my prayers pretty quickly after that because that was not great. And of course, as I've become an adult, I've come to learn that I have had chronic anxiety my entire life. And given my unstable attachment issues, that makes sense, right? I remember TV is weird, man, how many memories I can link to a television show or a commercial. But I can think of there's two commercials in particular at a very formative age, and probably 5 or 6, right around the time that all of these sort of anxieties and panic attacks are congealing in my life. One commercial I remember was for the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where there's just a bunch of random people. "What is the meaning of life? I've been trying to figure it out my whole life." And of course, I as a child, I understand it's for a church, but the question is still a valid one. And I just remember, yeah, what is the meaning of life? And how does a 6-year-old answer that question? And that it always stuck out to me. It still does. But then there was another commercial, and I want to say it was about learning CPR. It must have been because in the commercial, somebody is choking, and whoever they got to do the acting for that commercial was really good because their face looked truly panicked. And I remember after watching that commercial, I had a distinct anxiety around choking. I even choked once on scrambled eggs. Of all the things you could choke on, I choked on scrambled eggs and didn't eat eggs for like a year because of it. These things, they played into that anxiety, that tension that I have. My parents had variations on similar beliefs around God and the afterlife. And like I said, neither were particularly religious, but they both expressed basic common language about God and what comes after, and generic ideology about it. And I remember specific conversations where I asked both of them, either of them, about God and death and the afterlife and all of those normal questions that kids ask. At least I felt like they were normal. We went to church occasionally, but church was never a thing that I enjoyed. And their answers were never really great about putting my anxieties to rest. It was always a basic, yes, there's a God. Sure, there's an afterlife and you'll go to heaven if you're good. That doesn't help. And like I said, we went to church on occasion, but I never enjoyed it. As I got older, I started to deal with my anxieties by reading a lot. And as I look back, I can see a general trend of consuming texts that talked about meaning and purpose. And of course, looking back, I was searching for ways to cope with garden variety existential dread. But a side effect of reading and learning and living is that the comfort that so many get through faith, it has always eluded me. And I mean, I'm partially turned off by authority figures and power structures, which, organized religion. I'm definitely turned off by practices and beliefs that are inherently exclusive. I could just never get my mind wrapped around the idea that there's a large portion of people that are just not going to be saved or accepted or something. Doesn't seem right. And I also just think that nothing I've heard captures the essence of the universe or gets it right. And I think that's what brings comfort, is that beauty. Community brings comfort. Being with people, feeling safe with people. And stories make us feel safe and make us feel connected. And I think those are the parts of faith or spirituality or religion that don't get emphasized enough. And instead, it's all about the power and the structure, not the beauty, not the community, not the story. Well, thankfully, I partnered with a person who has no such fears or anxieties about death. And she's also much more attuned to those very things that I just described, beauty, community, and stories, but in ways that allow them to shine through in daily living. And of course, having kids changed everything. Not everybody wants kids. Not everybody can have kids. And I'm not saying that procreation is the only way to begin this process, but having kids and caring for kids really offers an advantage for decentering. There are suddenly these people that, at least for me, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but I know for me that I would do anything for them, for their safety and their security. And it really puts into perspective this obsession with existentialism. What does it all mean? Why are we here? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because existentialism is a selfish mentality. It's the pursuit of permanence. And when we pursue permanence, what we're really doing is we're leading to hoarding and wealth gathering and, gosh, capitalism. And those things just leave life devoid of meaning, because everything becomes about avoidance and fear and scarcity rather than authenticity and intention and joy. As I reflect, I'm really proud of the work that Eva and I, that we have done to avoid some of the shortcomings that we observed in our parents, especially when it comes to the big topics, including aging and death. We answer their questions honestly. We encourage curiosity. We expect open-mindedness. We strive to embed community in their lives. And we are trying to offer them the mental, emotional, and practical skills that everyone needs in the absence of parents or other safety nets. And what that means sometimes is knowing how to learn something new, knowing who to ask when you can't find it, being present for others in your community, and nurturing your community so that they will be there for you when you need them. I think one of the saddest truths that I've learned in the time since my mother died is that she and my father were the major threads that tied our immediate or nuclear family together. So when she was gone, the threads that bound our family together were reduced by half. I mean, yeah, we have extended family, but those connections also flowed through our parents. And in the years since her death, us kids have drifted from each other. Interestingly, we have actually physically moved closer to each other. But closeness does not always yield connection. I wonder what will happen when my father, who recently turned 77, leaves us. Will we be cast adrift from each other and cling to our own communities, whatever they may be? I think this is a common weakness of many modern families that emphasize turning inward toward the nuclear family. I've been guilty of this for much of my life. But as I see the value and strength possible from community, familial, chosen, and otherwise, largely thanks to the work of Eva, to whom I am forever grateful, I do believe that we are teaching our children that they will be okay. I know that I have drifted away from where I initially started, but that's how it goes sometimes. My mother was not perfect, but was all the more special and dear because of those imperfections. And of course, we often have more to learn from mistakes than we do from successes. I have made a lot of mistakes. And if I can continuously find ways to learn from my mistakes and hers, then she still continues to be a present and positive force in my life. I dreamt of her a lot after she died. In those early months and years, she would appear as angry, often sick, and would lash out. Maybe that was her spirit still coming to grips with her life having ended. Maybe it was the energy of her life not having quite synced with the grander energy of the universe. Or maybe it was my own inner struggle to cope with the loss. She still visits me occasionally, and when she does, it's usually quite mundane, and that feels about right. I think it means that we are healing together still. That's it for this episode and this series. Thanks for listening. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, feel free to share them with me via social media or email me at finloslives@gmail.com. Or you can leave a voice message via the SpeakPipe app at finloslives.com. If you enjoyed this content, I hope you'll share the podcast. I look forward to our next conversation.